My mother made me sing and perform at church, and I thought it was so uncool then, but did it, contribute to me being more well-rounded and confident in myself and able to articulate, and as I found, have an interest in the spoken word and the written word, writing my first book at 11, doing Oliver Twist. It would all have been considered unhealthy to those who didn't think it was cool, but at that time, not as worryingly more so now, if you pursue bettering yourself, it's seen as uncool. Then it was cool to participate in everything. And I can only pay tribute to those who developed me in a whole community sense, and that I was fully immersed and able to develop my extracurricular activities, my emotional intelligence that could be applied to my intellect. And I think it should be and see sport and physical activity as a fundamental core curriculum, not extra curriculum, core curriculum. And some of the learning that we advocate in the Youth Charter says, well, you can read, write and count with a football or hockey stick, anything you choose to use if you've got the right, creative, innovative teachers and coaches.
From Coordinate Sport, it's The Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders and experts and the stories behind their business journeys. Our guest in this episode is Geoff Thompson, MBE, Deputy Chair of the Birmingham 2022 Commonwealth Games. Geoff has used his platform as a world champion to inspire and lead the Sport for Peace and Development movement, launching the Youth Charter and becoming a champion for young people. He has held roles at the highest level of global sports administration and has a network of the great and good of world sport. After a period outside the public eye, Geoff's desire to effect change was reignited by the killing of George Floyd, and he stepped back into the public life to take on his latest challenge with the Birmingham 2022 team. During the episode, we discussed Geoff's early life, the challenges he faced, and how he found karate and his mentor. We also dig into his leadership philosophies and performance habits, as well as hearing how he's come out of retirement and is bidding to qualify for major championships again. Get ready to take notes and enjoy the show. Okay, so I'm delighted to welcome Geoff Thompson, MBE, GB karate legend, and currently the Deputy Chair of Birmingham 2022 Commonwealth Games, also the founder of the Youth Charter and a sport for development and peace pioneer. Welcome to the show, Geoff.
James, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you as well for giving it your time to speak to us. How we normally start the show is to give our listeners an insight into your background and let them get to know you a little bit better. And a lot of them might know you from your exploits in karate. But if we take you all the way back to your childhood, did you have an early sporting memory? What would be your first memory of sport growing up?
My first sporting memory would be a local and national one, which would be living within half a mile from Wolverhampton Wanderers Football Club in Molineux. So, every couple of weeks during the football season, I saw a lot of people and a great deal of noise, but didn't see anything by way of me being able to witness as a fan what was happening in that stadium, but certainly feeling the energy that was certainly generated as a result. I think what really came to my mind and consciously stayed in my mind, however, was watching the 68 Olympics in Mexico and watching John Carlos and Tommy Smith achieving their gold medals, but with sullen faces and reverently bowed heads as they walked to the podium to receive their medals, and then that symbolic fist raised that just stayed with me. And at the time, in my curious, then early development as a boy, and having lost my father at around that time, looking for role models that looked like me, and with what it globally represented in its significance at the time, the civil rights movement. I was aware, obviously, we lost Martin Luther King in 68, Robert Kennedy. There were lots of things happening in the world that were about racial justice and racial equality and global consciousness. So to see that symbol really did stay with me and had an indelible mark on, I think, my behavioural psyche at the time.
And I guess watching that from Wolverhampton at the time and growing up there, I guess how was that received at school? Do you remember it? Obviously, for yourself, it resonated with you, but do you feel like did it resonate in your local community? Or I'm guessing, I'm assuming it wasn't as diverse as it was when you moved on.
Because I lived in 3 New Hampton Road, which again, ironically, was a further half a mile away from what was then the Conservative Social Club, where Enoch Powell penned these Rivers of Blood speech, but now, ironically, a West Indian cultural centre. But I think upon my father dying in 65, and then my mother as a young widow having to relocate to the East End of London, it became very clear to me that whilst it would have been culturally almost bubbled existence in Wolverhampton and moving to the East End of London, where you had that melting pot of diversity, the issues were very relevant. And that I know, being at primary school, then having to put soap on my face, because I thought that was the thing to do in order to be included to play. started to tell me that very quickly I had to adapt to my environment. And I've always believed you adapt to your environment. The colour of my skin wasn't something I could change, but my accent was. So dandelion became all right, mate. And then you started to believe that you could play a part of the environment you wanted to be included in. I learned that I didn't have to put soap on my face some days later, and the bullying, all the insecurities, and quite clearly the trauma of losing my father and being relocated from a rural setting to in a city setting. I believed in the disaffection it provided, gave me others that I could have similar views with. So even in primary school, issues are being discussed, but as you moved into secondary school, double period Monday mornings, there was always a rights issue, a race issue that we were discussing, because we were very conscious. Well, I was very conscious, and it was almost a debating society. So yes, I've always been very conscious of the inequalities of life, the racial inequalities of life, and would even go so far as having Angela Davis as my, poster girl on my wall, because I was looking for something to believe, belong, and identify with.
Do you feel that's different for this generation? Obviously now, and obviously we're going to talk about it, from things that happened last year to now, very much in the awareness has been raised. But do you feel like you said, debating society, etc., and almost that culture in school, do you feel like that's how it is now for today's young people? I know probably might have changed over the last 12 months or so, but
I think it has changed. Obviously, we didn't have social media. We had human interaction, free speech, which is what wars were fought over. That's what my father represented, fought for Britain in the Second World War. He fought for a freedom of speech, a political ideology. Those gifts of free speech, I believe I was able to express respectfully, albeit firmly and at times forcefully, because that's what freedom of speech and the democracy that allows respectful free speech to do. I think that in turn gave me an emotional set of armory and life armory that allowed me to hold my own and compete in the challenges I would face because of what I looked like, where I came from, what I believed in, what I sounded like. But I think what we have now is a more informed generation, but a less emotionally resilient generation. And I think heritage and ancestry are the very root, I think, constituents of your behavioral characteristics, of which you then develop a personality trait that's reflected of your family, your culture, and your environment, of which you are a product of. So I think we're also politically correct. We're scared to offer a view, a respectful view. As a result, I think we've become a more intolerant society, and the term cultural wars are used, but that's why I believe sport and the arts are the cultural unifier, not so much a divider, but can bring us to a common place of trust, confidence, and respect.
You might have a different opinion. For me, I guess when I look at it in terms of definitely now sport and the arts, that might be where a lot of young people, young black people might be looking for their role models. You listed them there in the 60s civil rights movement, and all of the role models that I remember as a child are kind of gone now, if that makes sense. I remember having like a bit of a sinking feeling at the time when Muhammad Ali, Mandela passed. I was kind of like, who else is going to kind of take on that mantle? Like, obviously now for young people, they might look at it as a sports person, and a lot of great work's being done, but there's not really anyone. I guess we're going off topic for our normal show, but just out of curiosity myself, how you kind of view that, being in that, having those kind of really key leaders for the community, and then now maybe not so much. I don't know whether you agree or not.
Wholeheartedly agree. I mean, again, Muhammad Ali, in 65, becoming world champion the way he did, in the ring, out of the ring, an activist, an icon, working with the Muhammad Ali Centre, meeting Muhammad Ali in 1988, then working with the late President Mandela in post-apartheid South Africa. I realised I was a very blessed individual in that the people I saw visually struggling for that equality of purpose and of their people that they represented, now almost globally respected because they had stood firm and consistent to that vision, mission, and set of ideals and values that would become common in the diversity of engagement. And I've learned you have to pay a price of struggle and pain in order to ascend into that very unique, I consider to be global, iconic club. I think you're quite right. We don't have the Muhammad Alis, we don't have the Mandelas, we don't have the Kofi Annans, but we do have the legacy. And the legacy of their efforts, again, something I feel very fortunate to have been able to have met all three and many others that I saw and then inspired me. And I think maybe that's why I believe that whilst I was the best known unknown, I'll be known for what I've done, inspired by the shoulders that I stand upon, and then hopefully with others become shoulders that our current generation and future generations will be inspired enough to stand on our shoulders. So that's why the Youth Charter, the Social Coach Leadership Programme, why I'm now Deputy Chair of Birmingham 2022, at a time where, as we know, when May 25th happened and George Floyd was murdered, I took a step back from public life. I had fought hard and been fighting since the age of 7. You get tired, you get battle weary, you take a step back. That global moment in time challenges you personally, professionally and spiritually, and then it's time to get back into the fight. So that's what I'm doing now, and bringing those lessons, those life experiences, those inspirational, global, iconic leaders who ridiculed, considered terrorists, do you understand me, traitors, now fondly missed, but very much reflected in. And again, social media is providing a wonderful reservoir of information. So when I meet a group of young teenagers and I say Mandela and they look at me in a inquisitorial way, or Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or Maya Angelou or Angela Davis or Mandela or Muhammad Ali, I just ask them to go to Google.
Yeah.
And they go to Google and then their eyes light up. And from doing their Xbox, I've seen this, they've been there for now an hour. And then they're questioning what was said by any means necessary, as opposed to 50 Cent, get rich or die trying. It's how we engage, it's how we stimulate their discussions. And rather than using their thumbs so quickly, I'd like them to use their thumbs to inform them, and then a balanced and, I think, healthy debate that can stimulate their mental, physical, and emotional health, well-being, and safeguarding, because that information of power safeguards them, because they will still be stereotypically and societally placed in either a box ticked or a label that only they can emancipate themselves from individually and collectively.
Just one more question on school life. I'm really interested in terms of, obviously from a sport and physical activity background or perspective. When you were coming up at school, primary, secondary, what was your experience of sport? I know we spoke before previously around kind of your mindset at the time, but for you as I guess your experience, we hear a lot about it now with children's physical activity and what that looks like now. What was it like for you growing up in the two areas that you did?
What it was like for me growing up as a product of Sport for All, of which I'm proud to clearly share with many who ask me about my incredible journey from the streets to the stadiums, occasionally to the rostrum and back to the streets, is that as part of my disaffection, losing my father, relocating to East End and suffering, I think, my own internal frustrations that would see a volcanic temper, sport and the arts were my escape. And I was able to participate, when I look back now, on so much activity. There was so much preschool, during school and post-school activity. Then there was the church group activity and youth club activity. And, it was, my mother made me sing and perform at church, and I thought it was so uncool then, but did it, contribute to me being more well-rounded and confident in myself and able to articulate, and as I found, have an interest in the spoken word and the written word, writing my first book at 11, that being in the school library, doing Oliver Twist. It would all have been considered unhealthy to those who didn't think it was cool, but at that time, not as worryingly more so now, if you pursue bettering yourself, it's seen as uncool. Then it was cool to participate in everything. And I can only pay tribute to those who developed me in a whole community sense, in that I was fully immersed and able to develop my extracurricular activities, my emotional intelligence that could be applied to my intellect. And I think it should be, and see, sport and physical activity as a fundamental core curriculum, not extra curriculum, core curriculum. And some of the learning that we advocate in the Youth Charter says, well, you can read, write and count with a football, a hockey stick, anything you choose to use, if you've got the right, create, innovative teachers and coaches. And I believe teachers should be coaches, and that way they can start to use their unique styles within a curriculum framework, but more innovatively meeting young people's, I think, informed knowledge that they're quite prepared to challenge. But I couldn't fault it. Going to the Michael Sobel Sports Centre, I wasn't a sporting protege. I went there as part of school sport, went there as after-school sport, walked through a taster course, and there was Mr. Tatsuo Suzuki, one of the greatest exponents of karate to have migrated to this country, and my life was changed. I was then immersed into another culture. I had John El Honsi, I had Natsumi Kobayashi, I had these wonderful world-class instructors who embraced me and took me under their wing, and they developed me as a character. There was a code, there was a culture, there was a discipline, there was a curriculum for life, targets and goals, black belts and gradings. You were in a social, diverse setting of people from all different walks of life. So it was just a transformative ability to apply my own self-discipline as opposed to my mother's extremely tough love at the time, as well as those in the community who would reinforce their wish to simply realize my potential.
So you attended Brookhouse School. Obviously, I know some of the alumni from that school are probably quite famous. But you had entrepreneurial skills as well at that time.
Yeah, but Mick McFarlane, Olympian, Commonwealth Games gold medalist. Ian Dow, World Games bodybuilding champion. Rodney Marsh went to Brookhouse School. It was a school where you had so much talent, and Alan Sugar went to Brookhouse. That everybody had the East End innovation and life resilience.
Yeah, is it that pressure makes diamonds mentality? I guess. Yeah,
absolutely. And all boys school. We were bunking off to go to the all girls school at Dalston Mount, and it was as tribal as it could be. You had rivalry with the other all boys school. That's why I like mixed education. A mixed curriculum with separate curriculum development. Corresponding with girls developed before us. But so you build healthy relationships that aren't then pursued with an ignorance or an immaturity that might be relevant to the generation of the time. But no, they were great days. But I sold my West Indian patties. I was making £7 a day. I was learning my marketing communication skills, and this was a security issue. So I went to the Michael Sobel Sports Centre, which we'd gone to for school sport. I walked past the door. Mr. Tatsuo Suzuki at the time, an incredible martial artist and karate pioneer who brought modern day karate to this country. And I was hooked. A curriculum for life, and completely immersed myself in what for me was self-discipline. My mother would instill discipline, but this was an opportunity of instilling my own behavioral characteristics through a curriculum. You had a system, you had belts. I've always said I think it's one of the most subconsciously brilliant systems to develop that individual and collective respect, discipline, as well as development at a pace and level of your abilities.
So that's going to be one of my questions in terms of tough time in the environment you're growing up in, but in terms of those kind of beacons or those role models, obviously the karate would have brought that for you. Was there any others on the way, or any school teachers or any of that who made an impression? I guess maybe maybe positive or negative, on the way.
No, there was positive as there were negative. I say to my tribe, there are people in the world who will like you, and the people in the world who won't like you. Find the positive people who like you and stick with them and learn from them, develop them, contribute to them. Mr. Kellum, the late Mr. Hobson, they were profoundly influential figures in my life because they saw the good in me, they saw the potential in me. At church, I had wonderful role models at church, equally not so wonderful. And this is where in every aspect of life, there's the challenge and there's the opportunity, there's the good and the bad. And I've learned to focus on what the art of the possible might be. In life, things happen for two reasons: people, personalities, and relationships. Whatever good or bad happens, it will be down to that. So karate exposed me to a new culture. Jumana Hill-Homsey, the late Jumana Hill-Homsey, Tatsuo Suzuki, Utsumi Kobayashi. I was inducted into a new family, a new community, a new culture. And because I had great talent and they saw my potential, they invested in me. They didn't contribute or support, they genuinely invested in me. And without them, I wouldn't be here today. And it is so important to have that diversity, as I realize now, of wisdom, knowledge, experience, that personally and professionally, always just, whenever I looked as I was veering off that path, they nudged me back, or they'd stop me, challenge me, and seek that confirmation that I was still willing to commit to that potential that they saw in me.
So it's kind of always your decision to continue to commit rather than being forced.
That was the defining and I think uniqueness of those extraordinary individuals. With my mother as the ultimate warrior and benchmark, because the relationship, I'm a self-confessed mummy's boy. So within that, my mother was always there. I always said in world competition, there's only one person who could have beat me and my mother.
Brilliant. So just in terms of that, at that moment in time, what year are you looking at when you first walk into the gym and kind of get exposed to karate?
Michael Sobel Sports Centre in 1973.
Right. So 1973 karate in the East End of London. What did that look like? I'm trying to picture it. Massive participation, or is it quite a niche?
Yeah. No. Well, don't forget the Bruce Lee era was there. I mean, another inspirational impacts of my life. I took back two warriors in their respective arenas. It would have been Muhammad Ali in the ring and out of the ring, and Bruce Lee. He was promoting and challenging the racial stereotypes of the time. And again, I think one of the iconic global influencers of the 20th century, without a shadow of a doubt. And as a result, the Bruce Lee craze swelled all martial arts clubs. They all benefited, and karate in particular. So you would go to a typical karate class, and it really was diverse, from taxi drivers, students, civil servants. Do you understand me? There was black aggression coupled with this sort of nuanced civil servant sort of, university type. You had taxi drivers, but you all lined up in a karate suit. The belts determine the level of your competence and abilities. And then the socialization that happened after the session is where you really developed, I believe, societal understanding of yourself and others. And it was a fantastic environment. The Michael Sobel Sports Centre is still here today. Michael Sobel, the philanthropist, the Variety Club, and I think it was Islington Council. It was those collaborations that saw me as a product of sport for all, and so many from the streets that went on to compete for Britain and represent Britain at major games and major championships.
So yeah, that was one of my questions. So in terms of that, it's almost like you're leaving everything at the door. So it's kind of an equalizer coming through into the class. The belts are the kind of determinant in that environment. My first
objective was not a gold medal; it was to get my black belt. It was almost the qualification for me that I needed. It was not sitting me down for 2 hours and examining me and marking a paper. This was about Geoff Thompson. This was about how I behaved, how my behavioural character and personality traits had improved, and then were being skillfully expressed in technique, mind, body, spirit, hand, feet, combinations. It really is, for me, the fundamental human right that should be exposed and made available to every young person. So that first all-important target and goal of the black belt was achieved. And then as I achieved my black belt, come on, for any teenager, I was about 18 then, I was one of the youngest black belts of my generation and one of the most talented. I stumbled into competition, or it stumbled into me, and it was, again, local inter-club championship. Mr. Suzuki said, you will fight in my team, the Suzuki A team, which had a formidable, already well-established gathering of black talent. And first competition was grievous bodily harm with rules. I didn't understand Japanese. The rules were in Japanese, but I thought, do it unto others before they do it unto you. And I got a silver medal, and I didn't look much like the look of that bling. Saw this guy walking off with gold, and I thought, I want some of that. So there was the second goal and ambition. And grief, it was just incredible. Again, a further investment going into the East End, going into those training environments. And before I knew it, I was emerging through the ranks as an under-21 England international, progressing into the seniors as one of the brightest talents of my generation, but still pushing against. I've always challenged and asked why, if it doesn't make sense to me. So was always considered more than a handful.
So I'm just really curious on Mr. Suzuki. So what's his story in terms of he's built up this I guess this community, but what was his background? Did he just come to the East End and looking for talent, or born in Japan?
Born in Japan at the end of the Second World War. Young boy, disaffected in his own right, unsure of his family situation, but I know that he went to the American military bases and endeared himself to those bases, and that's where he started to learn what was a mix of what had resulted from the war, whether it was Korean karate or the Okinawan karate. He earned himself odd jobs, and then again, literally by force of will, then was introduced to the Wadaru style of karate, which is a way of peace. Hinori Otsuka, an intellectual, used jiu-jitsu and karate and merged the two into one of the most effective fighting systems. And Tatsuo Suzuki, again, excelled sufficiently enough post-war that the Japanese government wanted to provide a positive cultural image of Japan. And Tatsuo Suzuki migrated to Britain and literally changed lives.
It's just really interesting, the story, to think like that, like
no,
the connection of the two of you, and
he was an extended father to me, without a shadow of a doubt, and he improved the lives of so many individuals, and in particular for those who went on, and he could fight. This man was 5'6", but the spirit of 7 foot, an absolute. I always called him the modern day samurai, and the glint in his eye. His Suzuki A-team was all black. Let's cut to the chase. It was an all black team of raw power and aggression. But my God, when we entered stadiums and teams walked away, they wouldn't register. And we produced from that Suzuki A-team. Vic Charles and myself went on to compete for Britain, as did Neiman Prince. Or those who didn't went back into life. But the Suzuki A-team and the UKKW, the WADO team that was nationally representative of the style, was dominant. And that team that I again was part of, 4 members went on to represent Britain, with 3 of us winning the world heavyweight title. So without Wado Karate, and globally, we've achieved the most medals at world level and European level.
So I don't know, like looking at your record, obviously Euros, world champs a couple of times in Taipei, Sydney, traveling the world, representing GB. How did that kind of stack up with your experience back home on the streets? Like obviously a lot of conflict going on in the 80s. You're out in Taipei, 82, 86, Sydney, Madrid, all these places where you're traveling around representing the country. But then how was your... I don't know if I'm getting the question, of course, but how was that? How did those two things marry up together?
It was a time of great contradiction. I always said when we got to the semi-final stage, this isn't just about us. The West Indies cricket team were literally, as a collective group of, again, black raw talent, upholding the pride of that migrating Caribbean diaspora and even the African diaspora. People took time off work just to go to those matches because their pride was upheld for all that they would suffer. And I know that in the 80s, that was the additional motivation. I wasn't going to go back a failure. And in my communities, if you lost, you lost, but you couldn't fail. So, competing around the world and dominating the world, leading a Great Britain team, which I again had the privilege to do, whilst we had riots and where we had the racial tensions of the time, was always, as I've said, I've always been an activist. I've always been pursuant of injustices being given their rightful equality of redemption, or of being put right what is wrong. And whenever we came back from a major championship, I went back to the streets. The streets are where I came from, to the barber shop, the gambling house. You went back to those who respected you, had pride in you. And I was doing it for them just as much as I was doing it for me. And that has always stayed with me. You never forget where you come from. You always stay true to your ancestry and your heritage. And then you can compete in a multicultural, diverse setting. That's why a world championship was unbelievable. We'd have up to 80 countries of the world. And they're all in different, tracksuits. And that's when your nerves kick in. And then you've got to know where you've come from. And then you've got to know what you represent. And competition karate is the ultimate combative sport. You're not allowed to knock your opponent out, or else you've not shown the discipline. But the skill level is as such. Every non-contact sport is contact. So you've got the best of both worlds. But no, I couldn't think of a better time. But as I came back, it was always about, the riots. I remember meeting with then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, because gold medals gave you currency.
And access.
Exactly. Access. And I remember the conversation vividly. It was, only if it allowed a few minutes. And irrespective of politics, her leadership, presence and assuredness was certainly extraordinary. And I just said, Prime Minister, you said sport was for the unclean, and I'm one of the unclean, and I'm in here talking to you rather than outside waiting for you. And that captivated her. We spoke for 10 minutes. Within 10 days, I had an appointment letter, and sport in the inner cities. After the riots, myself, Clive Lloyd, sports, Steve Ovett, civil servants and businessmen went the length and breadth of the country where the riots had taken place. And 8 prime ministers on, 30 odd years later, I have told the truth to power. in what Sport for All can do, must do in providing hope and opportunity.
And do you think that was your kind of first step into the administration side of things? And obviously, I wanted to touch on the Olympics, but I guess it's probably worth us looking at later on. I know karate at the time that wasn't an Olympic sport. I guess that might have been most athletes. That's the kind of pinnacle, isn't it? You want to get in the Olympics.
When I was 17, karate was going to be an Olympic sport.
It took a long time to get it on there.
It took a long time to get it. And I said those Mexico Olympics, Tommy Smith, John Carr said, Ali was an Olympian. Yeah, I'd always, if you set the bar of excellence to the levels of people said I always possibly extremely at times set that bar so high, you'd go to the BBC Sports Personality, obviously Daly and I, contemporaries. He was clearly the better known Thompson. I was the best known unknown Thompson. But I wanted Olympic gold. Anyone who has any ambition always wants to take it to the next level. That's why I walked away from the sport at 27. I wanted to excel. No, I don't think, 27. I hadn't even peaked in karate, but
because you kind of done everything, you'd won everything you could win and done everything apart from that Olympic.
I was becoming a pain to the administrators. I was becoming the best known unknown in the sport. I'd celebritized it to the point, Live Aid in '85 will never be forgotten. It's rare where the arts have been activist on the issues of inequalities that were experienced in Africa. And I was part of Live Aid. And that's what inspired me to launch the Youth Charter. But it's always been about affecting change, always been about making a difference.
Through that, you're raising the profile of, obviously I'm not looking at karate, I guess, at this time, but you're raising a profile. So through the 80s, it's kind of mainstream, right? You're on Wogan and on these type of shows.
Great. Yeah, it was great. I mean, the officials didn't much like it. And with karate being a subjective sport, it's their interpretation of the points and the rules. But no, it was fantastic times. As I said, I took karate into the mainstream, and it was, I was sprinting anyway as part of my training. And I remember then saying the Seoul Olympics, with me exhausting my relationship with karate, I wanted to do something new. And then, the 4 hurdles were there, Ed Moses, you watch that global occasion and event that the Olympics provided. So as I started to move into sports administration by around, that period of time, I was pretty much, I think, well placed to make a contribution both on the square, off the square, on the track, off the track.
So at this stage, you're currently making the move into sports administration. It's kind of like tying up with the kind of end of your first, when you first stepped away from karate. Was there a transition into athletics during that period? And I know did you compete as an athlete or sprinter for hurdles?
I joined Harrogate Athletics, which again was almost the mecca of all the talent of the time. Did track times in Ravensburg in Germany, where I was still contributing to karate. And the UK trials at the time was the first past the post system, something I was completely unused to in karate, where they determined what happened to you.
Judgments, yeah, of course.
So I remember picking the injury up in the hamstring before the UK trials, and then pushed it too hard and then tore the hamstrings. And that's when the Olympic ambition almost was put on pause, because the sports administrative activity saw me more engaged. The establishment of the Prince's Trust, I remember being asked by Kensington Palace to look at how sport and the arts could play a more important role in the lives of young people. And, it was a time where you almost uniquely found yourself much in demand, but at the same time, as you're big, you're black, stereotypically, are you a threat? But here I am displaying discipline, but hopefully many people have said, you throw your words together better than the stereotypical notion of those who are in a combat sport. And as you represented those streets, I felt that there was a contribution of value that would help the decision makers at the time. So as I've said, the Inner City Review Group saw me as a member of the then GB Sports Council, which had only ever had 2 faces that looked like me before. And I remember Paul Stevenson leaving with great public controversy, likening it to apartheid as an institution. So when I was appointed, it was following the late Ron Pickering, again, a great servant to British athletics, but to so much talent from the streets, especially from Hackney. There was a panorama, the race game, and it was looking at black administration and leadership, or the lack of it, should I say. in British sporting institutions. And I was interviewed, I contributed. Within 48 hours, the now Lord Moynihan and the Minister for Sport, Colin Moynihan, called me in and said, I'd like to appoint you to the GB Sports Council. 11 years later, I more than, I think, demonstrated my ability to not only hold my own, but to help shape policy that would have a significant impact on the communities I've come from, and especially those making the journey from social grassroots development performance up to the excellence and levels of representing their country.
So, I mean, really want to look at the kind of origin story for the Youth Charter, and I know particularly, I know you're involved in Manchester and bids for the Games, etc. At that time. And is it right in saying that it's still unsolved now, but the Benji Stanley murder at that point, is that kind of the catalyst for the Youth Charter? I know it's probably building up for you through your experience, but at that moment when that happened and a lot of things were going on at the same time, similar incidents, but was that the kind of trigger or the catalyst for you to launch it?
Most definitely. We'd had the riots. We'd been to Moss Side as part of the independent review for sport in the inner cities. Believe it or not, I was on my way to Hollywood. Ended up in Manchester. Manchester were bidding their second bid following the 96 failed bid for the 2000 Olympics. I was at Salford University establishing a sports management division, joined the bid, and on January the 2nd, 1993, a 14-year-old schoolboy was shot dead on the streets of Moss Side. His name was Benji Stanley, and I'll never forget it. That was the moment Janice, my wife, challenged me and said, what are you going to do about it? Geldof did it with the F word. I launched a charter. I took young people from the north to meet young people from the south at the then Rackman Conference, which was the gathering for sport and recreation at Wembley. And I'll be honest, my size, the intent, the purpose, the energy of what I felt and hoped would never come to this country, the gang culture, in that violent, extreme form, saw me make an ask that was given, and the rest, they say, is history. I never thought it would be a lifelong vocation. And I thought Benji's life, and if we recall, over the next 3 to 4 months, Stephen Lawrence was murdered, James Bulger lost his life. I believe it was a seminal moment for children and young people in this country. So I did, and I am absolutely non-regretful of having done that. And I showed what the power of sport can do. And I believe 28 years on, albeit I'm still haunted and frustrated and saddened by the continued loss of life, I know what sport for development for peace looks like. I know that Benji Stanley, all too often not known, that's why every time I speak and interviewed or present, his name and his face will not be forgotten, because from tragedy came a global movement of opportunity.
Definitely. In terms of distance travelled, I know, like you said, 28 years of work in the sport for development, sport for peace. What do you see the differences are? Hopefully, the progress that we've made across that period, like you said, I know it's still violence and still kind of massive challenges. But where do you feel the big leaps have been for us?
There's clearly progress that's been made, and I'm always very, very tough on the levels.
Because it's easy to focus. It's easy to focus on the incident that's just happened or whatever it is. But there has been progress. Yeah,
I know. But as we speak, last week I was in Manchester at some major housing association conference talking about communities and resilience and leadership. And a mother from Moss Side recognised me outside the Midland and said, "We don't see us." Well, I've relocated. I've moved over the last 18 months. And for an hour we spoke. And I said, "Isn't it nice for me to come to Manchester, without lives being lost?" And the next morning, front page of the Manchester Evening News, a 16-year-old schoolboy is chased and macheted to death. And James, I'm sorry, I hated losing. So why would my critics challenge me? Why are you still doing this? Why was I going to accept lives lost? And since Benji Stanley, there have been too many lives lost. And every single time that life is lost, it becomes an additional haunting and motivation that we get this right. So the positives, of course, I can, and always paying tribute to the late President Mandela, because within months of me launching the charter, I went to South Africa, where again, more important than any World Championship, I led the delegation that looked at the vision for sport for the new South Africa. It's for another time as to what happened, but I know that I brought Ubuntu, I brought what they were doing in the townships with nothing, and I brought it back to our communities who said we needed a grant or we needed a handout. No, we didn't. Our communities were richer with nothing than they are now with something. And that whole experience and the continual to and fro from South Africa back to the UK really globalized the effort. And I would say a movement that I believe the Youth Charter inspired. And then I traveled incessantly, became a sector, and now I believe it's an industry. I want to remove it from an industry back to a movement. There are so many charities, James, that does this work. So why are we still losing lives? Why are we still hemorrhaging?
So when you comment, with that comment of industry, is it almost like I don't know, like you say, like industrial complex kind of thing, where it's like we need it to continue to kind of self-preservation of people's roles, etc., rather than actually making a change like the movement. And I love that to bring it back to me.
Great ethical and moral question. I wanted to do myself out of. I wanted the Youth Charter to simply be a symbol of a scroll signed by sportsmen, as it was in '93, and consistently throughout the years. Everybody's got a sporting ambassador. Everybody's got charity. But it's like third world aid. I liken it to third world aid. There was a time you didn't need to go into those communities. Communities were doing it for themselves. Yeah. So I want to re-engage, re-equip and re-empower those communities for themselves, by themselves, with themselves. That's the only way it becomes sustainable. I've overseen hundreds and hundreds of millions that have gone into our communities of disaffection and historical deprivation, hard to reach, all terms that are used for policy, strategies and monies that have not had their lasting and meaningful impact. Why? Look at educational non-attainment and the lack of sport and physical activity. Look at the lack of the mental, physical, and emotional health and well-being that sees that disaffection from the classroom into the playground go beyond the school gate. The lack of cohesive development and coherent approaches has seen as a result communities dysfunctional. And when we look at the streets, my benchmark is simple. This is a fact. Since January 2021 to the present, we have lost 51 lives under the age of 21. James, I don't care what anyone ever says. I will never accept it. It is not on the basis of sport for development. Those who have the power are empowered or have the positions, and I've watched them all. We've inspired most of them. That's not a good benchmark upon which we assess the work that we're doing. And those are the ones who are not alive. What about those who are in the University of Crime? It's a social, cultural, and economic consideration. And that's why, yes, if not for George Floyd, I would not have come back to public life. I took a big step back because it can exhaust you, like any sporting pursuit of excellence, an injury, do you understand me? A lack of form.
I was going to say that's that. Like you touched on it earlier in terms of your the culture, right? So it's not accepted to not try and not try. So it's almost like a never-ending battle. So that took its toll, right? So you took a step back, and it's almost that same question again, like you said before. At the time with Benji and Janice said, "What are you going to do about it?" Is it that kind of that question? And I get it posed to a lot of people, and with the George Floyd murder and seeing that firsthand, everyone had that thought of what am I going to do about it? What can I do about it? And obviously you've got a higher profile than most. Yeah,
James, I've been fighting since the age of 7. Every day of my life, I have fought on the basis of an instance, a situation, or an encounter that will see what I look like become the determinant of the situation I'm exposed to and experience. There are days you're up for it, you have the emotional armor for it, the days you're not up for it. You're human. The step back from public life was what I was exposed to because I'd gone out of sport and I'd gone into the higher education sector another time. What I was exposed to there reminded me, as my mother said, when I was 11, I told her I was English and British. She went, "You're black." I remember challenging her because she brought us up to challenge. And she waited until I was about 47. Muhammad Ali was coming to Britain. I'd helped arrange it, and it got become very dysfunctional. And I got very frustrated. And she looked at me and said, "Do you remember you said you were British and English?" Just had a smile on her face, because mothers never forget. And COVID kicked in. It gave a period of review, reflection. And I'd never watched that 9 minutes and 20 odd, 6 odd seconds, because I know what I'm like. I got clips, and Darnella Fraser, an 18-year-old young woman, had the presence of mind to record that. You didn't see that mobile phone waver or the emotion of it become too much for her. She steadfastly stayed firm and focused. Not only recording it, she had the courage to post it. And that changed the world for the moment and for the time. I saw that, and it had a profound impact on me. Geoff Thompson became a black man. That's all I am. Not valued, not appreciated, not respected. And I had to ask myself some very deep questions. And I did. And I decided that I would get back into what I felt was still required and still important.
That was the step back into public life. I know that we're going to kind of a good moment to pick up on the current role with the Commonwealth Games, and was that the catalyst of getting involved directly with the games in Birmingham, or there the challenges around diversity and things like that? Is that one of the reasons why you took up that position?
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. You know, the 2002 Commonwealth Games in Manchester were the game changers. You know, able-bodied, competing alongside, disabled athletes. What we did with the Connecting Communities program, bringing young people to the games, we've never had a chance to. You know, there was so much greatness that was achieved by that northern city. And I was called and asked to consider it. I thought long and hard and deep about it. I presented what I felt was a vision in adding value, just to not reflecting diversity, that thought, knowledge, common purpose, values, a games for everyone is the theme. And obviously the youth charter, the legacy pledges, the legacy plan, the legacy strands, the sport and physical activity in areas of priority had to see me commit. And for me, it's the last big effort of seeing these games reconnect and re-engage with communities here in Birmingham, 185 different nationalities, but the 72 nations of the Commonwealth. It is a Commonwealth city. So nationally and the Commonwealth as a whole, I don't think there would have been a more important time for these games to bring us all together and to realise something more than the games. Sport for Development for Peace, all of the aspects that the games can do to provide hope and opportunity to young people and communities of the Commonwealth is why I'm there and why I'm committed to seeing these games become a success.
And fast forwarding now, obviously so many experiences, fantastic experiences within sport, within administration, higher education, etc. Have you kind of developed any philosophies into how you lead an organisation or how you engage at kind of the board level, executive level? Or have you distilled into a theory at all?
I think it's more than a theory, it's a lived experience of leading by example, inspired by my mother. Everything she did and asked of me, my brother, my sister, she led by demonstrating how it will be done and then expecting us to do it, learn, and when not sure, ask. And as I took those skill sets and then refined them in karate and then became an instructor and a coach while still competing and winning, you had to be able to react and respond. And my philosophy to leadership is very, very simple. It's a common sense approach. I have evolved from the School of Hard Knocks, the University of Life, a degree in common sense, and now an applied wisdom PhD in life. And life is about challenges and opportunities. It's about turning negatives into positives. It's about taking risk and turning it into reward. And that has to reflect real life experience. Emotional intelligence, I believe in the emotional armor, see, smell, hear, feel, and taste. And then as you become a product of your environment, you need to weigh up the pros and cons of every issue you face in life. So whether I'm in a school, whether I'm in a corporate boardroom, I believe the same principle is applied because we are all equal, just that society's diverse nature of what the social, cultural, economic, and even political influences might be determine, in my view, that we all bleed red. Now, once you recognize that, once you identify the issue, you weigh up the pros and cons, you work out what the negatives are against positives. The negatives are always a positive waiting to happen. Look at where the alignment is, then identify the 7 things you need to do to overcome and resolve that issue. Once you've done that, the all-important Geoff Thompson leadership adage is positive, negative things happen in life because of people, personalities, and relationships. Therefore, you've got the issue, weighed up the pros and cons. You then find the right individuals at the right time, the right purpose of the 7 things you need to achieve. People always ask why 7, that's another.
I was just going to pick on that. Yeah.
It's spiritual. It's part of the equilibrium of 4 and 3 being 7 or 5 and 2 being 7. It's the formulas that you establish when you really start looking at this in depth. It doesn't have to be 7 things. It might be one significant task or goal that needs to be realized. But 7's your maximum. If you've gone beyond that, it will be too much for you to achieve and it will overwhelm you. Okay. You then, as I've said, look for the all-important people who will help you achieve, because individual leadership is only realized when you get collective leadership responsibility. So when you're building teams, complementary skill sets, the Great Britain team I led all had complementary skill sets, but we all wanted to win for Britain. And then we wanted to win from the communities we came from, the cities we came from, the families we came from. But that became that overall motivation. And once you have your inner circle, those you trust with your life, so simple as that. The outer circle, those who you can trust and have confidence in, and the outer circle, the periphery, people who you will work with, but wouldn't have the trust of your inner and outer circle selection of life journey.
Inner and outer circle, you're applying that to life in general as well then, right? So
absolutely. In an inner circle, an example of inner circle, you received a phone call, text or email, my son, daughter, almost valuable, almost life priceless commodity of love and appreciation is going to arrive on your door. I cannot explain why, but I will contact you soon. And in that time, I'm entrusting you with their lives or with the responsibility that I place on your doorstep. That's your inner circle. Your periphery are people that you can work with professionally, who understand you, understand philosophy, mission, objectives, and values, but you wouldn't have at your breakfast table. So who would you have at your breakfast table as part of your outer circle? And the periphery of people that you respect, would work with, would have a confidence and respect of what they might be able to do, but you would never trust them completely. It's very important in determining those relationships, because that will determine how you overcome the issue. And then finally, the time in which it needs to be developed and executed. Is it a day? Is it a week? Is it a month? 6 months? A year? Whatever it is, you set out the plan and you deliver. And my Common Sense Leadership book will be produced early next year. And it will simply just share with individuals what I've learned, what I've been inspired by, and what I believe I share in my everyday philosophy of common sense leadership excellence.
Looking at the Commonwealth Games at the moment, are you applying that there, and are we all on track for launch?
Let's be clear. This will be the first multi-sport event that will have been delivered with a 2-year vital aspect of the Games taken forward remotely. This will be an extraordinary achievement. And 650 staff are currently working in a remote, non-remote setting. That will become 1,200 staff beginning next year. 40,000 volunteers have expressed their interest to become what will be a final selection of 14,000 volunteers. And it's one of the most diverse expressions of volunteer interest of any major Games to date. In all of that, 4,500 sportsmen and women of the Commonwealth, officials, 72 Commonwealth countries, 19 different sports of the inclusive Games in its uniqueness, para and able-bodied, competing in the same program, valued in the same way, and at the same time, a legacy program. So it's a massive effort and there's a massive commitment. So what I'm applying are all the attributes and qualities that I've developed, both as a sportsman, as an administrator, the sporting activism, but making sure that people are equipped and empowered and challenged to make sure we deliver these Games, because I believe these Games offer a reset to our communities here and in the Commonwealth and globally. Sport for development, the legacy. As you know, my life work has been committed to that. So I want to see that sport and physical activity, mental, physical, emotional, health, well-being, benefit, realize the theme of a Games for everyone. Massive effort. Of course, there are many challenges. Of course, there's uncertainties, but it's a great team. The diversity challenges that many people ask me about, so I'll get it in before you ask me, is not always just a look. And yes, without George Floyd, I would not have considered taking on a massive responsibility of this kind. But there are people, as you saw in the response to George Floyd, it was a diversity of global revulsion at what happened that said, this is wrong, it must be put right. So there's diverse thinking, knowledge, experience, commitment. John Crabtree, Chair, Ian Reid, the board, staff, in all its areas of expertise, but more importantly, the wider community are beginning to believe that these games can be for them. And that's what I'm committed to. And that's why speaking to you this time next year will be a great opportunity to reflect on what the art of the possible was in both its challenges and its opportunities. But I'll be applying the same leadership approach I have done all my life, and I've inspired many others to do so in their lives.
I guess a lot of lessons learnt, or 10 years on from London 2012.
And 20 years on from Manchester 2002.
Well, there you go, yeah.
It's been a long journey, but it's 10 years next year to London 2012.
And that legacy, though, as well, that legacy is held up by a lot of, I guess, as a beacon for, 2012 is held up as a beacon by other prospective sites as a best practice for legacy. And obviously you've got many of the people who are involved in the Commonwealth Games and supporting and yourself.
Yeah, I think the model for legacy was the LA 84 Olympic Games. Peter Uberoth decided to present the Games in a more inclusive, diverse, and economically, socially, and culturally innovative way. And the LA 84 Foundation, which took the first ever proceeds from Olympic Games, there was actually an overspend, went into a foundation, and that foundation
is still going today, right?
Absolutely, and is changing lives. That was how I met Anita de France, former Olympic bronze medalist rower in the 76 Olympics, who became the CEO, but more important, the president, but the longest serving IOC member, certainly of America's illustrious Olympic traditions. And she came to Moss Side when we were bidding for the 2000 Olympics, when Benji Stanley was shot dead. And we took the Spirit of Human Moss Side tour of LA and realized what the art of the possible could be. I think many years on, Beijing will have hosted uniquely and hopefully with the Summer Games and the Winter Games next year, what 2012 is doing. And I'm on the board of the London Legacy Development Corporation. Legacy is a 25-year project. East Manchester will tell you that. If you go there now, there's so much that's been achieved. However, the software, the hardware is always there, the changes that have been made. The software, the people element is something the Pledge of 2012 did not deliver, inspiring a generation. Everyone has accepted that. How do we change that? I think Birmingham can do that. That's why I still am approaching how we took the connecting communities of bringing young people from all over the country to those games who would normally not have had a chance or an opportunity. And that coincided with the late Mandela's Ubuntu and the post-apartheid genius of using sport and the arts, again, of launching the charter in I think it was the March. I was in South Africa in November, contributing to the vision for sport for New South Africa. So I'm bringing all of this effort together. It's a massive, I'm treating it as it would be in all the World Championships rolled into one, and just make sure these games deliver on the vision, mission, pledge, values, but more importantly to those who would least have the opportunity.
I know only one problem with Birmingham 2022 is no karate, right, on the schedule.
No karate.
Are you in shape at the moment? You're in shape at the moment to you would have qualified anyway, right?
Only karate once to feature in Tokyo.
Yeah.
Many people know that I made my intentions very clear. I'm in fighting for the streets and returning back to the competition square for those lives being lost on the streets, and for the combat sports that have channeled the aggression of so many to represent themselves and distinguish themselves at Olympic, World, European Championship level. I was prevented from qualifying. I put that on the record. Discrimination and an intolerant world out of ignorance and fear will always be the case of us as a human species. But that didn't then, by way of a disappointment, a negative, not see me now turn it into a positive. So I'm now aiming to compete in the World Karate Championships in Dubai in November. Equally, the Commonwealth Karate Championships will happen after the Commonwealth Games next year. And my aim is to see karate recognized as a Commonwealth Games Federation discipline and hopefully see it included in future games, because it is about sport for development. It's the best return on any social and cultural grassroots investment, because all you need is space and an individual, and they can impart all that they need to give hope and opportunity to those who would least have an opportunity or seek ambition as part of their life potential. So, yeah, there's a lot to do. I'm training hard.
And that, we normally ask as well, what kind of a combined question. It's like, do you have any routines and habits that you do every day to keep yourself working at top performance? Also, like, what does a day look like? So I'm interested in how you fit in your training around and maybe what the routine looks like to keep in shape and keep performing at a high level and manage stresses of everyday life.
I'll answer in the reverse. Stress kills, pressure is healthy. If you know what to do with it, channel it and express it in the right way. So I always work on the basis of understanding pressure, knowing the difference especially in leadership, of pressure and stress. And by managing the stress levels that hopefully do not result from knowing what pressure is and how to manage pressure and express it, leading into the type of sessions that lead to the routine and habits of life. The first most important meeting is with yourself, whether it's in the morning, the midday, or late in the day. For me, it's got to be in the morning. It's the best start to the day. So I book a meeting with myself. And there are 2 workouts in particular that characterize what I have developed in my unique life journey to date. One was handed down to me by the late, great sporting psychologist and physiologist, the late Gordon Richards, who developed post-war generations of winners, too many to mention. But pattering was used in military terms, firstly, to keep soldiers fit, and was basically a form of running on the spot, but it gave you different gears, and that a medium pace right to an infinity pace. And if you follow that for up to 10 minutes a day, you can stay in exceptionally good shape. So you can do it in water, you can do it on any surface, you can do it in any setting. So when I'm on the move, in a hotel room or in a gym or in my own little unique dojo here in Ashford, I can do that to a very high level. From that base, you can be mentally, physically, emotionally strong and able to handle the pressures of life and their challenges and opportunities. The elite level of work that I'm doing now, my fellow warrior, then world champion Geoff Thompson, she is again one of the best coaches I've ever had, but achieves her own gold medals, remarried. And that philosophy is reflected in her coaching as she has done for the last 2 years. And it's the quality of what you do in the time that you're given. And that quality is there. It's the rest and recovery that I've learned would have suggested that we overtrained when we had that overabundance of energy. We didn't know what to do with it. And I realized then, if I know now what I knew then, I think there'd have been another 5 gold medals that would have been added to my illustrious collection. So it's when you can pit with my knowledge and wisdom now with the current generation that everyone said was impossible. We know that impossible is nothing. You have to believe, belong, identify, and commit. And yeah, it's the quality of what I do. So the routine, up early, morning meditative prayer or contemplation. Don't touch the laptop, because if I do, I won't have that all-important meeting with myself. A schedule is worked out to reflect what I have to deliver that week in meetings, presentations, commitments, and development time. And then delivering that, recording it, noting it, and make sure you get to the end of the week a little better than how you found it at the beginning of the week.
Yeah, take some positive steps wherever you can, exactly.
Has to be positivity. The positives will always outweigh the negatives, and the negatives are simply positives waiting to happen.
So last question for me, and it's always a reflective one, we do this every time on the show. If you could go back in time and speak to the younger Geoff, maybe when you're leaving school or just like early, starting out in your life, a career, and you could give yourself one piece of advice, what would you go back and tell yourself?
I would have told myself to not be so hard on myself because of the things that happened to me at such an early age. I would advocate that you take children to funerals to experience the whole experience of loss. And I would have said, had I not attended that whole experience as the result in the loss of my father, and different cultures have different approaches, I think to have put a child through that experience was a traumatic one and had a profound impact on me for a number of years, of which I'm still getting to grips with, where I can be comfortable in my skin. So the advice I would have given myself at the time would have not to have gone to my father's coffin, to have explored him in his cold, lifeless state, and to be haunted by it for so many years, but equally inspired by it as I came to know him for what he did, what he achieved in fighting for this country, me representing this country, now serving in public life. So again, it will always be spiritual. At such a young age, don't place yourself in such unusual and extraordinary settings where you don't understand it and the impact it can have upon you. And to retain the innocence of youth, which means you never grow up, which for a lot of the male species we never do anyway. So I suppose from that standpoint, I'm still work in progress by God's sense of humour.
Yeah, I think we all are. But Geoff, thank you so much for your time. I know we had struggles getting together and getting things arranged, but I'm really grateful for you to give your time and insights for the show.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_Ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sports.